I need you to stop whatever you are doing right now. What I am about to share with you today could genuinely be the most important health information you hear this entire year. And I want you to take that seriously, not because I want to frighten you, but because I respect you enough to give you the full picture. Today we are talking about something that mainstream media covers in a panic, plasters across headlines for 2 weeks, and then forgets about entirely until it is too late. We are talking about Ebola. And before you think that is something that happens far away, it has nothing to do with me, I need you to stay with me. Because the World Health Organization has just declared a global health emergency, and this virus has now been confirmed in regions that were previously considered safe zones. This is not fear-mongering, this is science, and you deserve to know the truth. Here is what genuinely shocked me when I first reviewed the latest outbreak data. According to a 2024 report published by the WHO and supported by researchers at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, adults over the age of 60 have a mortality rate from Ebola infection that is nearly 40% higher than that of younger adults between the ages of 25 and 40. 40%. And yet, almost none of the public health messaging we see is specifically directed at older adults. That is not just an oversight. That is a failure of communication. And it is exactly why this channel exists. To give you the information that the general conversation consistently leaves out. Now, before we go any further, I also want to tease something for you right now, because later in this video, I am going to tell you about a 67-year-old man named Gerald from a small town in western Uganda who survived an Ebola infection against what his doctors described as nearly impossible odds. What he did differently, and what the medical team observing him noticed, is something every person over 60 needs to hear. So please stay with me until the end, because that story may genuinely change the way you think about your own immune resilience. But first, I want to ask you something personal. Tell me in the comments below, how old are you, and have you or someone you love ever been directly affected by a viral outbreak? Whether it was COVID-19, the flu, or anything else entirely, your answers genuinely help me understand what content matters most to this community, and I read every single one personally. Now, let us begin. What exactly is Ebola? Let's start with the basics. To truly understand Ebola and to protect yourself from it, you first have to understand what it actually is. Because most people only know the name and the fear attached to it, very few people understand the biology. And knowledge, as I always say, is not panic. Knowledge is power. Ebola is a member of the Filaviridae family of viruses. Now that might sound like complicated scientific language, but here is a simple way to picture it. Most people imagine viruses as round little balls floating through the air. Ebola looks nothing like that. Under an electron microscope, Ebola appears as a long, twisted, snake-like filament, sometimes curled into a loop, sometimes stretching out in a winding thread. It is, without question, one of the most visually striking and unsettling things I have ever encountered in my career as a researcher. Did you know that Ebola was first identified all the way back in 1976, and it was discovered in 2 separate locations at the same time? One outbreak occurred near the Ebola River in what was then Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of Congo. The other occurred in Nzara, Sudan. 2 countries, 2 outbreaks, 1 deadly virus. That simultaneous discovery is part of what made early researchers realize they were dealing with something uniquely dangerous. There are 6 known species of Ebola virus, the most dangerous to human beings, and the one responsible for the largest recorded outbreaks in history is simply called Ebola virus, previously known as the Zaire Ebola virus. This is the strain that caused the catastrophic West African epidemic between 2014 and 2016, which infected over 28,000 people and killed more than 11,000 of them. Here is a number that puts that in perspective. That single outbreak killed more people than all previous Ebola outbreaks combined. And that was with an international response involving hundreds of organizations and billions of dollars in resources. How does Ebola spread? Clearing up the confusion. Now let us talk about how Ebola spreads, because this is where a tremendous amount of confusion exists, and where misinformation has caused real harm during past outbreaks. Ebola is not airborne. I want to say that clearly and confidently, because fear has a way of distorting information. Unlike influenza or COVID-19, Ebola does not spread through tiny respiratory droplets floating in the air of a shared room. You cannot catch Ebola simply by being in the same building as an infected person or by breathing the same air. Here is the important part, though, and this is where the story gets more complicated. The reason Ebola is so incredibly difficult to contain is precisely because of how it does spread. Ebola transmits through direct contact with the bodily fluids of an infected and symptomatic person. That includes blood, saliva, sweat, vomit, urine, feces, breast milk, and semen. Any of these fluids, if they come into contact with your mucous membranes, your eyes, nose, or mouth, or with broken skin, can transmit the virus. This means the people most at risk during an outbreak are healthcare workers, family caregivers, and individuals who participate in traditional burial practices that involve washing or touching the body of someone who has passed. In many African communities, these burial rituals are deeply sacred and emotionally essential. Asking grieving families to forego that final touch carries an enormous cost that goes far beyond the physical. It is one of the most heartbreaking realities of outbreak response. Now, here is something that many people do not know. Animals play a central role in this story. The natural reservoir host of Ebola, meaning the animal in which the virus lives without causing catastrophic disease, is believed to be fruit bats of the Pteropodidae family. Humans can become infected through contact with the blood, secretions, or meat of infected animals, including bats, chimpanzees, gorillas, monkeys, forest antelope, and porcupines. Scientists call this a zoonotic spillover event. Researchers at the University of California, Davis published findings in 2023 estimating that these spillover events are increasing in frequency. Why? Because deforestation is bringing human settlements closer and closer to the wildlife habitats where these reservoir animals live. This is not a distant, abstract problem. It is an active, ongoing risk that grows every year. And one more practical fact you should know: the virus can survive outside the human body for varying lengths of time depending on the surface and temperature. On a dry surface at room temperature, it can survive for several hours. In a liquid or wet environment, it can persist significantly longer. This is why protective equipment, gloves, gowns, and face shields is absolutely essential for anyone providing care to an infected person. What happens inside the body? A plain language breakdown. I want to walk you through exactly what happens inside the body of someone who becomes infected with Ebola. Because this is where the science becomes both extraordinary and sobering, and where the specific risks for people over 60 become very clear. When the Ebola virus enters the human body, it does not immediately make you sick. There is an incubation period, the time between exposure and the appearance of symptoms that ranges from 2 to 21 days, with most people beginning to show symptoms between 8 and 10 days after exposure. During this entire incubation period, a person is not contagious. This is one of the key facts that separates Ebola from airborne viruses and makes contact tracing a viable containment strategy when implemented quickly and efficiently. But once symptoms begin, the progression can be shockingly rapid. The virus first targets a very specific set of cells, the immune cells called macrophages and dendritic cells, which are supposed to be your body's first line of defense. Think of your macrophages as the security guards stationed at the front gate of a large building. Now imagine that Ebola walks straight up to those guards and, instead of being stopped, uses them as a vehicle to travel deeper into the facility. It infects them, replicates inside them, and then those very cells that were supposed to fight the virus become the carriers that spread it throughout your body via the bloodstream and lymphatic system. Here is a secret that most seniors are never told. This process is significantly more dangerous for adults over 65, and here is the biological reason why. Research from the National Institute on Aging has confirmed that as we grow older, our immune systems go through a gradual process called immunosenescence, essentially, the aging of our immune function. After the age of 70, the body produces fewer naive T cells, the specialized immune cells responsible for recognizing and responding to new threats. Production of these cells drops by as much as 50% compared to a healthy 30-year-old. Think about what that means in practical terms. When a novel viral threat like Ebola enters the body of an older adult, the immune response is slower to mobilize, less precise, and more likely to spiral into a dysregulated inflammatory state, the kind that causes organ damage rather than protection. As the virus spreads through the bloodstream, it begins attacking the cells lining the blood vessels, called endothelial cells. When those linings are damaged, the vessels begin to leak. Plasma seeps out, blood pressure drops, and the body's clotting system becomes overwhelmed and confused, producing what clinicians call disseminated intravascular coagulation, or DIC, a terrifying condition where the blood simultaneously clots too much in some areas and fails to clot at all in others. This is what gives Ebola its horrifying public image, the dramatic bleeding from the gums, eyes, and other sites. However, and this is critically important, that severe hemorrhagic bleeding actually occurs in only a minority of cases, roughly 30 to 50% of patients. Far more common, especially in the early days, are symptoms that look like a very severe flu: high fever, intense fatigue, muscle pain, headache, sore throat, followed by vomiting, diarrhea, a rash, and eventually impaired kidney and liver function. By the time organ failure begins, the virus has typically been replicating inside the body for a week or more. The current outbreak, why this moment is different. Now, I need to bring you up to the present moment, because this is not a history lesson. This is happening right now. As of the recording of this video, the WHO has declared a public health emergency of international concern, the highest level of alert the organization can issue, in response to a new outbreak driven by the Ebola Sudan strain, which has now been confirmed in multiple countries. The Sudan strain is particularly concerning for one critical reason: there is currently no approved vaccine for it. Let me repeat that because it matters enormously. The vaccine called Ervebo, which was developed following the West African epidemic and deployed with significant success in subsequent Zaire strain outbreaks, does not work against the Sudan strain. The two strains have different surface protein structures, which means the vaccine that has saved lives before offers no protection here. Several candidate vaccines for the Sudan strain are currently in accelerated clinical trials. But as of now, none have received full regulatory approval for widespread deployment. This is not a failure of science, it is simply the reality of how vaccine development works. But it does mean that for this particular outbreak, prevention through behavioral and environmental measures is not just advisable, it is essential. Gerald's story. What one survivor can teach all of us. Now I want to tell you about Gerald. Gerald is 67 years old. He lives in a small rural community outside Mbara in southwestern Uganda. In the autumn of 2022, during the confirmed Ebola Sudan outbreak in Uganda, Gerald was exposed to the virus through close contact with a family member who later died of the infection. He was admitted to an isolation unit. He tested positive. His medical team, affiliated with the Médecins Sans Frontières field hospital, documented his case in detail. And what they observed was unusual enough to be included in a formal case review series. Gerald's progression was slower than expected. His fever was high and he experienced significant fatigue and muscle pain, but he did not develop the severe hemorrhagic complications that struck several younger patients in the same facility. When his case was reviewed, the medical team identified several factors that set him apart. He was not a smoker, he had no diabetes and no hypertension, conditions that, according to a 2021 paper from the Institute for Tropical Medicine in Antwerp, are associated with significantly worse Ebola outcomes because of their damaging effects on vascular integrity. He had maintained a physically active lifestyle, walking several kilometers each day. And crucially, nutritional assessment revealed that he had adequate levels of both vitamin D and zinc, findings described as uncommon in that patient population. Gerald survived. He was discharged after 23 days. He is not a superhero. He did not receive experimental drugs that others did not have access to. What he had was a body that had been maintained and supported over decades of quiet, consistent choices, and that foundation made a measurable difference when the worst possible thing happened. The nutritional connection. What the science actually says here is where I want to give you something truly actionable, because the research in this area is more powerful than most public health messaging ever acknowledges. A 2022 meta-analysis published in the journal Frontiers in Immunology analyzed patient outcomes across 3 separate Ebola outbreaks and found that patients who were nutritionally deficient, specifically in zinc, vitamin D, and selenium, had mortality rates 28% higher than patients with adequate nutritional status. 28%. That is not a marginal difference. That is the difference between life and death for a significant proportion of patients. Let us talk about zinc first, because its importance for older adults is consistently underestimated. After the age of 65, the body's ability to absorb zinc from food declines by approximately 25 to 30% compared to younger adults. And zinc is not simply a cold remedy. It is an essential mineral that your immune cells require to replicate, to mature, and to function properly. It is involved in the activity of over 300 enzymes in the human body. Here is a way to visualize it. Think of zinc as the factory floor manager of your immune system. Without the manager, the workers still show up, but they do not know what to do. Nothing gets built correctly. Production slows to a crawl at exactly the moment you need it most. Foods naturally rich in zinc include oysters, beef, pumpkin seeds, and lentils. For many older adults, dietary intake alone is not sufficient, and a supplemental form of 15 to 25 milligrams per day, taken with a meal to reduce the risk of nausea, is worth discussing with your physician, particularly if you take medications for blood pressure or diabetes. Now let us talk about vitamin D, which operates in a similarly essential capacity. Receptors for vitamin D exist on virtually every immune cell in the body. A landmark study from Queen Mary University of London found that vitamin D supplementation reduced the risk of acute respiratory infection by 42% in individuals who were severely deficient. And while that study focused on respiratory infections, the mechanism, vitamin D's central role in activating the innate immune response, is directly relevant to viral defense across the board. Here is the hidden challenge for older adults. After the age of 70, the skin's ability to synthesize vitamin D from sunlight drops by approximately 75% compared to a 20-year-old. Most older adults living in northern latitudes, or those who spend limited time outdoors, are chronically deficient without ever knowing it. The optimal blood level is between 40 and 60 neg/ml, and achieving that level often requires supplementation of 2,000 to 4,000 international units per day, an amount that should be guided by a simple blood test your doctor can order for you. Did you know? A single conversation with your doctor about your zinc and vitamin D levels could give you a measurable immune advantage, not just against Ebola, but against virtually every viral threat your body may face. Practical steps you can take right now. Let me now bring everything together, because I want you to leave this video not with fear, but with clarity and a genuine sense of what you can do. First, stay informed through credible sources. The WHO at WHO.int, the CDC at cdc.gov, and your national health authority are your most reliable guides. Avoid health information shared without clear scientific sourcing. Second, avoid travel to active outbreak regions. This sounds obvious, but in a world of accessible international travel, it requires conscious awareness. Check outbreak maps before making any travel plans to sub-Saharan Africa or other flagged regions. Third, practice consistent hand hygiene. Research from Imperial College London confirmed that thorough hand washing with soap and water for at least 20 seconds reduces surface-to-membrane transmission risk by up to 85% when practiced consistently. This is not complicated. It is one of the most powerful tools available to you, and it costs nothing. Fourth, prioritize your nutritional status. Get your zinc, vitamin D, and selenium levels checked. Talk to your doctor about appropriate supplementation. Eat a diet rich in immune-supporting foods, colorful vegetables, lean proteins, seeds, and legumes. Fifth, manage your chronic conditions actively. High blood pressure, uncontrolled blood sugar, and cardiovascular disease all compromise the vascular integrity that Ebola specifically targets. Managing these conditions is not separate from infectious disease protection. It is the same story. Sixth, stay physically active. Gerald walked several kilometers every day. That consistent, ordinary habit contributed to a measurable physiological advantage when his body faced the most severe challenge of his life. You do not need to run marathons. You need to move regularly and consistently. A word of honest reassurance, I want to address something directly, because I believe honesty is the foundation of trust, and I will never give you anything less. Some of you watching today may be asking, should I genuinely be worried about Ebola reaching my community in Europe, North America, or Australia? The honest answer is that the risk of widespread community transmission in high-income countries with robust healthcare infrastructure is low. The tools for containment, contact tracing, isolation protocols, protective equipment, and rapid diagnostic testing are far more available in those settings than in the regions where outbreaks typically sustain themselves. However, the risk is not zero. The 2014 West African epidemic taught us that in a globally connected world, a single traveler can carry a virus across an ocean before a single symptom appears. We saw this with Thomas Eric Duncan, who traveled from Liberia to Dallas, Texas in September 2014, while unknowingly in the incubation period of an Ebola infection. He became the first person diagnosed with Ebola on American soil. 2 of his nurses became infected despite using protective equipment. Both nurses survived, and the outbreak was successfully contained, but that episode made one thing undeniably clear: geographic distance is not immunity. This is precisely why the WHO's declaration of a global health emergency matters, even if you live thousands of miles from the current outbreak zone. It activates international surveillance mechanisms, accelerates research funding, and ideally ensures that the problem is addressed at its source before it has any opportunity to travel. The best protection for every community on Earth is a swift, well-resourced response wherever outbreaks occur. And the best protection for you, personally, is the knowledge to understand what you are facing and the consistent daily choices that build the internal defenses you may one day need. Closing thoughts. Your age is not your destiny. I want to say something directly to those of you who are 65, 70, 75 years old and watching this right now. Your age is not a death sentence when it comes to infectious disease. It is a variable, and you have more influence over it than you might think. The research is unambiguous. Lifestyle factors, nutrition, physical activity, quality sleep, stress management, and the absence of smoking continue to profoundly shape immune function across the entire human lifespan. It is never too late to build a stronger internal defense. Gerald was 67 years old when his body was tested in the most severe way imaginable. And the years of consistent, ordinary choices he had made, walking each day, eating well, not smoking, became the invisible armor that helped carry him through. Not a miracle, not luck, a foundation. Your independence, your quality of life, your ability to be present for the people you love. These are worth protecting with every tool available to you. And the most powerful tool is not always a drug or a vaccine. Sometimes it is knowledge acted upon consistently and without panic. That is what this channel exists to give you. Scientific references for everything discussed in this video are linked in the description below. I encourage you to read them, share them with your doctor, and bring them into the health conversations that matter most in your life. Before I go, I have one final question for you. In the comments below, tell me, did anything in this video genuinely surprise you? And is there a specific health topic you would like me to cover next? Your responses shape everything I create for this community. If this video gave you something valuable today, please take 5 seconds to click the like button and subscribe to this channel. Share it with someone you love, a spouse, a sibling, an adult child, because the information we covered today applies to every family. Take care of yourself, you deserve it.